In this video we're going to be taking a quick look at, well, everything. I'm hoping this will be a handy video for both newcomers and established walkers and campers alike. Newcomers will get to see you don't need to spend a fortune on stuff, as well as hopefully see some of the kit that may interest them. And hopefully established outdoors types might see something interesting here through the sheer weight of variety I'm about to show. I have three broad categories for kit. Essentials, things like shelters, rucksacks and sleeping bags. Nice to haves, things like stoves, pillows and camouflage, stuff that you can just about work around if you don't have. And then trinkets, things that stay in your backpack most of the time, things like fire lighting kit, tick removal tools, toiletries, maybe even waterproofs would be in that category. Let's start with shelters. Firstly, if you're going hiking, even the biggest tent you take should be small. Don't get carried away looking at things like this, a 3-person Avon Deluxe. It's a fantastic tent, but for a campsite. It's huge, it's heavy, it's bulky, completely impractical for walking up the side of a hill with. If you're travelling as a pair and don't mind spending a very cosy night together in a small shelter, something like this 2-person backpacker tent might be ideal. You can spread the weight of your kit between your 2 rucksacks and just have one shelter to put up and break down together. In recent years, I've really enjoyed using this very cheap and cheerful trekker tent. It's a 1-person tent, lightweight and breaks down to a small footprint. However, you can tell that it isn't a really fancy, expensive tent. Although if you are just getting into this sort of stuff, it might be worth buying something cheap like this to see if you enjoy it, rather than spend a couple of £100 on a fancy small tent, only to absolutely hate it when you take it out for the first time. Moving on to bivvy bags. Now this is something I've only got into over the last 4 or 5 months, but it has changed my life when it comes to the outdoors. Look at this, a really cheap and cheerful mountain warehouse bivvy. It's basically just a waterproof bag to put your sleeping bag and stuff in. But when it comes to lightweight, small footprint, minimalist camping, you're going to struggle to beat a simple bivvy bag. For me personally, I prefer something just slightly more comfortable in the Alpkit Elan hooped bivvy. You can see with that very small hoop section at the top, it just keeps the main bulk of the bag away from your head and your face and shoulders, and you wouldn't think it would make much difference at this sort of size of shelter, but it really does. It also has various bits of ventilation covered by bug nets, which again makes it feel far more substantial and far more comfortable. And as you can see, in the mountain warehouse bivvy, I have to put one of those little bug net balaclavas on because I'm obsessed that things are going to crawl up my nose and in my ears overnight. Personally, I think this is one of the biggest problems of using just a bivvy bag though. You can see here it started raining, so I got in the bivvy bag, and that's where I had to basically be to stay sheltered. So if you're camping and it starts raining at 4 in the afternoon and carries on raining throughout the entire night, you're going to be stuck lying on the ground for a lot of time just to keep dry. Unless you happen to have a tarp. And now I was completely sceptical about tarps to the extent I didn't want to have to spend a load of money on one myself, and I in the end managed to get this one for free off DD Hammocks, although again this isn't a sponsored video or anything like that, it's just something I happen to use all the time. And I can't believe how versatile they are. The sheer amount of uses for them, and even just using trekking poles and a tarp, the amount of shelters you can build is fantastic. So coupling the tarp with the Alpkit Elan bivvy bag has been absolutely brilliant. You can see here on this particular night, I actually changed the tarp setup a few times using it with the open mountain warehouse bivvy bag. And I think this night really helped to completely sell me on the idea of the tarp and bivvy pairing, because you can just create so much dry indoor space that's covered over from the elements with the tarp. And then with something like the Alpkit Elan in particular, you can really wrap yourself up completely from the bugs and the elements while still having a nice open tarp shelter around you that's got plenty of space to keep your kit and everything dry. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of bivvy bags and a huge fan of tarps. So definitely something that might not be for beginners or for people who aren't enthusiasts, but don't immediately dismiss them like I did for literally years and years and years. A quick thought on mattresses. Firstly, there is a ridiculous variety of camping mats out there, ranging from the super cheap roll mats like this to incredibly technical and expensive inflatables that almost feel like they should be able to drive out to the campsite themselves. On a serious note though, something like this is a really good cheap option. However, they do roll up and still take up a huge amount of space, and you can see even using two together here, as soon as there's weight on them, they really do crush down to nothing. Whereas something like this Ecotech Hibernate inflatable is far more what I favour these days, because it just gives you that little bit more padding and cushioning, although this itself is a relatively cheap mat that doesn't give you a huge amount of insulation. You can see when I actually stayed overnight on this stony beach area, I actually used all three of my camping mats together, and still it wasn't perfect, but it was enough for me to actually get to sleep. So to be honest, I would advise you more in the line of an inflatable, because they very often will give you a little more cushioning and are likely to break down and roll up into a far smaller footprint for your backpack or whatever you're using to carry all your gear in. A really quick thought on pillows. This really does come down to your own personal tastes. There's loads of them out there that are super cheap, but I tend to these days just use my rucksack as a pillow rather than a proper inflatable. I just find it a little more comfortable somehow. Speaking of rucksacks, here's what I'm currently using. The Osprey Hikelight 26 and the rather curious modular Bergen from DD Hammocks. Again, full disclosure, they did send me that out for free, but this isn't sponsored, they haven't paid me anything or asked me to do this video. So firstly, my fancy rucksack, the Hikelight 26 from Osprey, and the newer version of this is even better than this one. But as you can see, it's a fancy backpack. It's an Osprey. It's got a metal frame in the back. It's got compression straps every which way you look. Features that are so advanced and technical that it almost feels like it's welded onto your back in some cases. On the other hand, the Bergen is really a much simpler item, even though it's far bigger and has all of these modular elements. You'll often see me in videos wearing it as just the most basic singular rucksack, or as what we call in Britain, a bum bag. So for me, something like this is excellent because if you're taking loads of kit with you, you can really load it up. But if you're not, you can ditch half of the weight of the rucksack itself by simply not taking all of the extra pockets. So yeah, really handy and definitely worth looking into something like that, even if it's not the one from DD Hammocks. This looks exciting. Let's talk about stoves. So I currently have two, but I desperately need a third, which we'll talk about in a second. So firstly, I have the tiny little Trangia alcohol burner, which even here in its cook set is absolutely tiny and lightweight compared to the much bigger, bulkier and heavier Kelly kettle / rocket stove, but they are for completely different purposes. Firstly, I love the Trangia. Along with my Elpkit Elan Bivvy, this is one of my favourite items that I own. It is very inefficient though. You can see the flame flailing around everywhere there, practically everywhere other than heating up the pot itself. But that's sort of the joy of using it to me. It's almost like a meditation that you're just enjoying being out in nature with a gentle flame flickering, not anything particularly exciting or fancy going on. Whereas the Kelly kettle is much more of a survival long-term outdoors item because you can burn random sticks and odds and ends in it, and it's very efficient to boil water with its cylindrical style. It means that if you go out for a week, as long as there's sticks on the ground that are relatively dry, you're going to be able to keep cooking and keep boiling water with it for as long as you need to. Whereas of course with the Trangia, whatever alcohol you've got to burn in it when you go out, that's it. Once that's gone, it's over. So on a serious note, I think they're both great items, but the Kelly kettle I would only use on very short distance hikes between where you're setting out from and where you're camping, or on day trips where you're not taking all of the extra weight of your camping gear as well, or if I'm going to be on an actual campsite. But I do absolutely love it as an item. Although I love using both of these stoves, I do want a third simple gas-based option, and I'm thinking something in the lines of a Jetboil, or for my budget, something far cheaper like the similar Fire Maple system. These are still self-contained little units that you can keep everything nice and neatly packed up in your bag in, but they don't have quite such a wild flame as the Trangia stove is sometimes liable to burn with. And if I'm out on a stealth camp or trying to keep a low profile, you can imagine when the Trangia really starts going wild with those flames, it's not particularly low key if you're out in the absolute darkness in the woods somewhere. Also, after the unbelievable heatwave we had in the UK that dried the ground out so much that wildfires started breaking out all over the place, you can imagine why I'd be hesitant to use something like the Trangia stove, not just because of the often large and wild flame, but also because you're basically burning a tub full of extremely flammable alcohol, and I would feel a very, very silly idiot if I accidentally tipped that over onto the dry woodland floor and then saw untold devastation unfold from a simple mistake. A super quick note on one of the most boring elements, but also the most important, and also the area where my setup is the worst: sleeping bags. I have not one but two really low quality, feeble, flimsy sleeping bags to use. But because they are so lightweight and flimsy and there's nothing to them, I can actually use them as a bit of a modular system, and they pack down to absolutely nothing. They're super compressible. However, I really need to get myself a good quality sleeping bag just to make sure that I've actually got something that when the winter comes around next and I'm going to be out in my bivvy bag for the first time, I've really got something good to keep me warm. However, the prices on sleeping bags and the variety can be an absolute minefield, and once again, you don't want to spend a fortune on something that isn't suitable. Trinkets is an interesting little category because individually these items don't weigh much or take up much space, but when put together in your rucksack they might add up to a surprising amount. I'm thinking everything from waterproof socks to various types of gloves and balaclavas, toiletries, first aid kits, all of that sort of stuff that it's definitely worth looking into and thinking about before you set off up the mountains with just a bivvy bag and a pillow. Finally, let me talk about a head torch. This is the Immolent HT70 head torch, and this might actually sound like it's sponsored because I'm so full of praise for it, but I'm really not. This was bought with my own money and all the rest of it, and I just think because of its various lighting modes, it's really well suited for camping, and I was so impressed with it that I actually reviewed it twice because although the first review was full of praise, once I'd used this on many, many wild camps and stealth camps, I was really even more overjoyed to have stumbled upon it. So I'll let you look at my proper review on that, along with a lot of the other items in this video, rather than dive into too much detail. But I really do recommend a headlight that, if it's not this one, then one that's got very similar features. Thank you very much for joining me for this wild ride through all sorts of camping kit and walking gear, my friends. I will leave a load of Amazon associate links down below to a lot of these items and my little storefront that I have on Amazon. So if you buy through those, I will get a commission. So that's a way that you can help support the channel without affecting the price that you pay if you so wish. And really, I'll just say a huge thank you to all of the people tuning in and watching these videos, especially to those who have supported me via PayPal or memberships or Facebook subscriptions and super thanks, just like some of my recent supporters: Melissa L, Dogs, Rob, Kaz G, Kevin Y, Jackie A, George B, Fake W, Art V, L Hughes, Steve B, John B, Sean B, BL Beach, Dawn H, A Sanford, T Seymour, and David D. Thank you very much, everybody. It really, really helps out and is greatly appreciated. Until the next time, keep it interesting, keep it kit worthy, have a fantastic day, and of course, farewell.